The city pulsed with artificial light, neon streaks reflecting off rain-slick pavement. The usual noise of distant sirens and murmured conversations filled the air. But in the abandoned outskirts, something far more dangerous was unfolding. Averon stood alone beneath the flickering glow of a broken street lamp, facing down 3 towering figures clad in segmented battle armor. Elite warriors of the Zari Dominion. Their exoskeletal plating shimmered faintly under the dim light, their eyes glowing with predatory confidence. They expected an easy kill. The human had no weapons, no backup, just a jagged rock clenched in his fist. One of the aliens let out a guttural chuckle, mandibles clicking in amusement. "Is this your grand strategy, human? A primitive stone?" Averon tilted his head, his green eyes sharp with challenge. "Something like that." Unnoticed by the Zari soldiers, a figure lurked in the shadows of a ruined warehouse, holding her breath. Sereni had seen many things in her lifetime: political betrayals, planetary invasions, the raw destruction of war. But what she saw now made no sense. A human, unarmed, against 3 of her people's finest warriors. And yet, there was no fear in his stance, only a calm certainty. He moved first. The rock left his hand with impossible precision, cutting through the air before any of the Zari could react. It struck the lead warrior's throat, slipping perfectly between the gaps in his armor. The alien staggered back, choking, his mandibles clicking in frantic distress. Averon was already in motion. He lunged forward, grabbing another piece of rubble from the ground. The second warrior drew his plasma blade, but the human ducked under the strike, pivoting with deadly grace. In a single, fluid motion, he jammed the rock into the soldier's exposed eye socket. A sickening crunch echoed in the alley. The Zari collapsed, shrieking in agony. The third soldier managed to react, drawing a plasma rifle, but Averon was faster. He snatched the fallen alien's weapon, turning it against its former owner. A single arc of sizzling energy pierced through the Zari's chest plate. He crumpled, lifeless. Silence fell. Sereni pressed herself against the cold warehouse wall, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. This shouldn't have been possible. She had seen human resistance fighters before, desperate, struggling to keep up with superior alien technology. But this man, he was something else entirely. Averon exhaled, shaking out his hands as though shaking off tension rather than the weight of taking 3 lives in mere seconds. Then, as if sensing her presence, he turned his head. Their eyes met. Violet clashed with green. Sereni felt frozen, caught between awe and disbelief. He shouldn't have been able to do that. He shouldn't have been able to win. Averon arched a brow. "You gonna just stand there? Or do you need help?" His voice pulled her back to reality. The moment shattered, replaced by the sinking weight of what she had just witnessed. She had been running for weeks, her own people hunting her down. She had expected death, capture, maybe at best a quick escape. She had not expected this. Sereni took a slow breath and stepped forward, fully into the light. That was the moment she realized. This human was unlike any she had ever encountered. Sereni hesitated before stepping fully into the dim light, her silver-hued skin catching the faint glow of the broken street lamp. Averon's sharp green eyes scanned her, assessing, questioning. She had seen that look before, on Zari officers, on bounty hunters, even on frightened humans. But his gaze lacked hostility. Instead, it held something else. Curiosity. The bodies of the 3 fallen Zari warriors lay motionless around them, their armored forms stark against the cracked pavement. Sereni still couldn't comprehend how a human, unarmed, outnumbered, had just taken down 3 elite soldiers as if it were nothing. The Zari Dominion's war propaganda described humans as primitive, physically inferior, and incapable of true combat prowess. And yet, this man had just shattered that belief in mere seconds. "They were hunting you," Averon stated. His voice was calm, steady, as though he wasn't standing over the bodies of some of the most dangerous killers in the galaxy. Sereni swallowed. She could still run. She could vanish into the night, take her chances elsewhere. But something about the human rooted her in place. She nodded. "Yes," Averon exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "Then I guess that makes 2 of us." Sarani's brow furrowed. You're being hunted? More like watched, followed, occasionally shot at, he admitted, giving her a lopsided smirk. You get used to it. She stared at him. No, you don't. The smirk faded slightly. Yeah, maybe not. Sarani's heart was still pounding, though not from fear anymore. The momentary stillness between them felt strange, charged. She had met humans before, dealt with them in official settings. But this one, Avaran, was unlike any she had ever encountered. I have to go, she murmured. Avaran glanced down at the fallen Zari. Probably a good idea. But if you think they were the only ones after you, you're wrong. This wasn't just a random patrol. If they found you, others will, too. She hated how right he was. The Dominion would not stop hunting her. And now, thanks to him, neither of them were safe. Avaran gestured toward a nearby alley. I know a place where we can lay low. You coming? Sarani hesitated. She had been alone for so long, running, hiding, never trusting. But if she left now, she wouldn't last the night. She nodded once. Lead the way. The city's underbelly stretched before them in tangled streets and forgotten alleyways. Avaran moved with confidence, weaving through the darkness, avoiding cameras and checkpoints with practiced ease. Sarani followed, keeping pace, noting the efficiency of his movements. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a survivor. You never said your name, he said over his shoulder. Sarani hesitated before answering. Sarani. Avaran grinned. Nice to meet you, Sarani. She frowned. I doubt this is a meeting either of us would call nice. He chuckled. Depends on how you look at it. Sarani was beginning to realize this human had a strange way of seeing the world. Most people, when confronted with danger, either panicked or turned cruel. He, however, faced it with a maddening mix of confidence and humor. They arrived at a small, run-down building, half hidden by collapsed structures and overgrown vines. The inside was barely furnished. Just an old cot, a workbench covered in scattered tools, and a single lantern that cast flickering light against the walls. It's not much, Avaran admitted, tossing his jacket onto a chair, but it keeps me off the radar. Sarani remained near the entrance, arms crossed. Why help me? Avaran tilted his head. Would you rather I hadn't? That's not an answer, he sighed, running a hand through his dark, sweat-damp hair. I don't like seeing people hunted, even aliens. Sarani studied him carefully. You risked your life for a stranger. Avaran shrugged. Didn't feel right, leaving you to die. Something about his words made her chest tighten. Zari society did not function on sentiment. Every action had a purpose. Sacrifices were made based on necessity, not emotion. And yet, this human had stepped into a fight that wasn't his, for no reason other than because he felt like it. It was reckless, irrational, and strangely admirable. You're not like other humans, she murmured. Avaran smirked. I'll take that as a compliment. Sarani sat down, exhaustion weighing on her. She had been running for weeks, always afraid, always looking over her shoulder. But here, in this tiny hideout with a human who fought like a ghost and spoke like a rogue, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Safe. She hated it. How long do you plan on staying in the city? Avaran asked. Sarani exhaled. I don't know. As long as it takes. For what? She hesitated. She could lie. Tell him she was just another fugitive. But something told her he would see through it. I was supposed to inherit a role within the Dominion, she admitted. But I refused. Avaran raised an eyebrow. Must have been an important role if they're sending elites after you. Sarani looked away. More important than I wanted it to be. Avaran didn't push. Instead, he leaned back, watching her with quiet interest. So what now? Sarani glanced at him. I could ask you the same question. He grinned. I figure we get some rest. Then we figure out how to get out of this mess. Sarani's lips twitched slightly. You say that as if it'll be easy. Avaran stretched out on the cot, hands behind his head. I've seen worse. Sarani shook her head. Humans were impossible. And yet, as she settled onto the floor, the warmth of the small space around her, She found herself hoping, just a little, that maybe this one was right. The sound of movement woke her. Sarani's senses snapped into focus. The room was still dark, but Avaran was already up, pressing a finger to his lips. Footsteps outside. Heavy. Sarani's heart pounded. They had been found. Avaran moved like a shadow, retrieving a small dagger from his belt. Sarani followed his lead, inching toward the door. A deep voice spoke outside, words in Zari tongue. She was seen entering this sector. The human may be with her. Sarani's breath caught. Avaran gave her a look that said, "Trust me." He moved fast. Before the door could be forced open, he yanked it inward, catching the nearest Zari off guard. In a blur, he drove his blade between the armor plates at the alien's neck, silencing him instantly. Sarani didn't hesitate. She grabbed the fallen Zari's sidearm, firing a clean shot into the next soldier's chest. The third tried to raise an alarm. Avaran tackled him before he could. The fight was over in seconds. Avaran exhaled. Damn. No time to stay now. Sarani looked down at the bodies. They weren't going to stop. More would come. She turned to Avaran. You should leave. This isn't your fight. Avaran stared at her for a long moment. Then he smirked. I think it is now. Sarani felt something strange settle in her chest. She had never trusted anyone before. Never let herself rely on someone else. But this human, this impossible, reckless human, was willing to fight for her, even when he had no reason to. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to run alone anymore. And that terrified her more than anything else. The night air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked concrete and ozone from discharged plasma rounds. Sarani's pulse pounded in her ears as she and Avaran moved swiftly through the city's underbelly, dodging security drones and Dominion patrols. They had barely escaped the last attack. Avaran led the way with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime navigating danger. Sarani wasn't sure if that reassured or unsettled her. He was human. He wasn't supposed to be this capable, this unshakable. Yet he fought like a predator, moved like a ghost, and, worst of all, refused to abandon her. They ducked into an alley, pressed against the cold metal walls of a derelict building. A patrol skimmer hummed overhead, its searchlights sweeping the street just beyond them. Sarani could feel the heat radiating from Avran's body as he leaned close, whispering against her ear. They're getting desperate. If they're willing to send this many units, it means they're running out of time. Sarani frowned. Running out of time for what? Avaran studied her for a moment, then exhaled. They don't just want you dead, do they? They need you alive. Sarani tensed. He wasn't wrong. The Dominion wanted her alive. She was supposed to be their future, a symbol of the Empire's continued dominance. Her father had made that clear before she fled. And now they were closing in, unwilling to let their wayward heir slip through their fingers. She looked up at Avaran. I should go alone. His expression darkened. Not happening. They won't stop coming for me. Then we make sure they don't get the chance. Sarani shook her head. You don't understand. This isn't your fight. Avaran let out a low chuckle. You keep saying that, but here we are. Sarani hated the way her chest tightened at his words. He spoke so easily, as if throwing himself into her chaos was as natural as breathing. She had spent so long running, alone, convinced that no one should stand beside her. And yet, here he was. The skimmer passed, and Avaran pulled away, his green eyes flickering with something unreadable. We need a plan. Running won't work forever. Sarani swallowed. He was right, of course. She had spent weeks running, and all it had done was get her backed into a corner. She needed to end this. But how? Her thoughts raced as she traced her fingers along the edge of the stolen Zari sidearm. The Dominion operated on power, on control. If she wanted to stop them, she had to hit them where it hurt. Their reputation. She met Avran's gaze. There's a transmission hub in the upper district. If I can get to it, I can broadcast a message to the entire Dominion network. Avaran raised an eyebrow. And what exactly do you plan on saying? Sarani hesitated. She wasn't sure yet, but she knew one thing. If she could show the truth, expose the Dominion's lies, it could fracture their hold on power. Avaran studied her for a moment before nodding. All right, sounds like a plan. Sarani blinked. You're just agreeing? He smirked. What, expecting an argument? I expected you to tell me it was too dangerous. Oh, it's definitely too dangerous. Avaran pushed off the wall, stretching his arms. But so was taking down 3 elites with a rock, and that worked out fine. Sarani huffed. That shouldn't have worked at all. He grinned. And yet, here we are. She didn't know whether to be exasperated or impressed. Probably both. Reaching the upper district was no easy feat. The lower city was a maze of collapsed buildings and forgotten alleyways. But the upper levels were pristine, heavily monitored, and crawling with Dominion enforcers. Sarani and Avaran moved like shadows, slipping through the cracks of the city's security. At one point, they had to scale the side of an abandoned transport hub, using exposed pipes and crumbling ledges. Sarani expected Avaran to struggle, but he climbed with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times before. When they finally reached the outer perimeter of the transmission hub, they crouched behind a cargo container, surveying the area. The structure was sleek, made of dark metal that pulsed faintly with power. Zari soldiers patrolled the entrance, their armor gleaming under artificial lights. Sarani took a slow breath. We need a distraction. Avaran grinned. I think I can handle that. Before she could stop him, he grabbed a small metal shard from the ground and flung it toward a supply cache near the guards. The shard struck the crates, triggering a loud clang. Instantly, the Zari soldiers turned, weapons raised. Avaran was already moving. He slipped behind them with impossible speed, knocking one unconscious with a sharp blow to the back of the head. Sarani followed his lead, swiftly taking out the second guard with a precise strike to his throat. The third tried to sound the alarm. Avaran didn't give him the chance. He wrenched the alien's plasma rifle from his hands and used it to knock him out cold. Sarani stared. You're infuriatingly good at this. Avaran smirked. I like to keep things interesting. She rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress the small, reluctant smile tugging at her lips. Together, they slipped inside the transmission hub. The interior was eerily silent, save for the hum of power running through the structure. Sarani moved quickly, her fingers flying over the controls of the central terminal. Avaran kept watch. How long? A few minutes, she murmured. Outside, sirens began to wail. The Dominion knew they were here. Avaran tightened his grip on his stolen weapon. No pressure or anything. Sarani gritted her teeth. Almost there. Just a few more keystrokes. The screen flickered. Then, transmission ready. She pressed the final command. Across the city and beyond, the Dominion's carefully curated propaganda feed was interrupted by her voice. This is Sarani of the Zari Dominion. You have been lied to. I was meant to rule, to uphold the Empire's control over you. But I refuse. The Dominion thrives on fear, on deception. But I have seen the truth. She took a breath, her voice steady. Humans are not weak. They are not inferior. They are resourceful, strong, capable of fighting back against those who seek to control them. I have seen it with my own eyes. And if we stand together, the Dominion will fall. The message cut out. Sarani turned to Avaran. His expression was unreadable. You just painted a massive target on your back. She exhaled. I know. Avaran studied her for a long moment, then smirked. Good. Now let's get the hell out of here. The alarms grew louder. The Dominion was coming. But for the first time in her life, Sarani wasn't afraid. She wasn't running anymore. And she wasn't alone. The rooftop was a war zone. Plasma fire streaked through the air as Sarani and Avaran ducked behind a ventilation unit, the Dominion forces closing in. Sarani's breath came fast, her heart pounding. They were surrounded, the transmission hub burning below them, the weight of the message she had broadcast pressing down on her. Avaran peeked around the corner, grimacing. They're not holding back. Of course they're not, Sarani muttered. I just declared war on the Dominion. Avaran smirked. Yeah, gotta say, that was pretty hot. She shot him an incredulous look. We're about to die, and that's what you focus on? His grin didn't waver. I like priorities. Before she could retort, A squad of enforcers advanced, their weapons raised. The leader, a towering Zari commander in dark armor, stepped forward. Princess Surani. His voice was a cold snarl. You have caused enough damage. Surrender, and I will ensure your punishment is swift. Surani tightened her grip on her stolen weapon. Not happening. The commander's mandibles twitched. You think this human can save you? He is nothing. Primitive. Weak. Avaran tilted his head, unfazed. That's so? Funny, because last time, I took out 3 of your elites with a rock. The commander stiffened, his soldiers exchanging uneasy glances. They had heard the story. The human who had humiliated the Dominion's finest warriors with nothing but a piece of rubble. Surani saw the hesitation and seized it. She raised her chin, stepping closer to Avaran. You call him weak, but he's done what your best soldiers couldn't. He's fought for me, stood beside me. Not because he was ordered to, but because he chose to. Avaran glanced at her, something unreadable in his eyes. Surani continued, her voice steady. I choose him, and together we're going to burn everything the Dominion stands for to the ground. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then the commander growled, raising his rifle. Enough. Kill them both. Before he could fire, the air roared as a black hovercraft shot over the rooftop, engines screaming. The side hatch slid open, revealing a grizzled human pilot. Get in, the pilot bellowed. Avaran grabbed Surani's hand. Time to go. They sprinted toward the hovering craft as plasma bolts scorched the rooftop behind them. Surani jumped first, catching the edge of the hatch as the pilot banked the ship sideways. Avaran turned, firing a final shot to keep the enforcers at bay, before leaping after her. Surani grabbed his wrist and pulled him in just as the hovercraft veered sharply, engines flaring. Below them, the Dominion forces scrambled, their shouts drowned out by the ship's roar. They were free. Avaran collapsed beside her, laughing breathlessly. That was fun. Surani stared at him, then shook her head. You're insane. He grinned. And you're stuck with me. She didn't deny it. The pilot glanced back. Where to? Surani hesitated. For the first time in her life, she wasn't being dragged somewhere. She had a choice. She turned to Avaran. Where do you think? His expression softened. Somewhere they can't touch you. Somewhere we can fight them on our terms. She nodded, a slow smile forming. Then let's make them regret ever coming after us. Avaran's grin widened. Now that is what I like to hear. As the hovercraft disappeared into the night, Surani looked at the human beside her, the man who had turned her world upside down. She had started this fight alone, but she wasn't alone anymore, and that changed everything.